Let me see. So I should be able to. Huh. You say I have, oh, there we go. Okay. Participants, all right. So I can share, so. Try sharing that. No. I'm running into problems with the UWM security stuff.
Is it just the slide that Sandy shared yesterday,
Yeah,
or did you
I didn't.
change it?
I didn't make any changes, but
Okay.
I've asked to share it, and I'm being
I can-
thrown into my security and privacy.
I can go ahead and just share it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. I was suddenly told today that a pop-up window came up that I need my device needs a security update. And now all sorts of things are going to go wrong until I actually do the security update.
Is everyone seeing that slide now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I see a couple of nods, so that's good news. The idea was to try to, I guess, quietly, without distracting from Sonia's messaging, to ask our Mass Steering Committee folks to share their department's endorsement or non-endorsement of the college readiness statement.
I'm very happy to say the UW Milwaukee Math Department met a couple of days ago and endorsed it. It would have been very embarrassing to come here and not have that.
Kevin, do you want to give Sonia her introduction and let her get started then in the meantime?
Yeah, let's do that. I think probably we need to, yeah, unshare the screen. So let's see, Sonia's here. Yeah, so that's here. So our main agenda item today is Sonia Sedavi from the UW System Testing Office, who's going to give us an update on the situation with placement testing right now. I know I have a few questions for her when she's done, because we've had a couple people from Milwaukee go to different system meetings and come back with information, and not quite entirely sure that it 100% aligned. So hopefully this time we'll get the true and accurate results. So Sonia, thank you for being here. Always a delight to hear from you. And start anytime you want.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks everybody for having me. I think that I might just start kind of with like a brief overview of what the last few years have been in terms of placement testing, but then particularly focus on the decision that was made at our advisory board meeting last December, what we did for placement testing this last year, and what we are going to be proposing for spring 2023. So I'm sure, as many of you know, prior to 2020, Placement testing was delivered largely in person and paper-based through our regional placement testing program, which was a set number of dates and locations where a student could choose one of the options that worked well with their schedule and that was near them, go for paper-based placement testing. Scores would come through our office. We would make sure that you had them on your campus in time for advising, orientation, and registration. For a number of years, in addition to that paper-based testing program, we also offered computer-based placement tests, again, in a proctored environment, while partnering with the company. Initially was Castle Worldwide. They were acquired by Scantron and recently have been acquired by Measure Learning. I might use those three interchangeably, but it's all the same entity. And that is very similar to, if you're familiar with like a Pearson or a Prometric model, where they're approved test sites. Students would sign up for a location and a time near them, go to that testing site. There would be a proctor there. Everything was done in a lockdown browser. And that was at an additional fee to the student because they were paying for a couple of things. First, for the software to deliver the tests, but largely they're paying for an individualized proctoring setting. And that worked very well for us for a number of years. And then 2020 happened. And I believe it was 3 days before regional placement testing was supposed to launch and have our first test date in March 2020 when Safer at Home came down. So many of you have been working with me for a number of years, so you've heard this maybe multiple times, but I think it is good to just kind of reiterate what happened and the decisions that the center made as a result of the pandemic or in response to the pandemic. So in 2020, after exploring numerous options, ultimately what we decided to do was to offer an online, unproctored version of all of our placement tests as an option for UW institutions. When we did that in 2020, in addition, we gave a very generous time limit for all of our exams. So typically the math exam and the English exam are 90-minute tests, and world language exams are each 60-minute tests, with the possibility for individuals to have an extended time accommodation due to a disability. But when we flipped to online unproctored placement testing in 2020, we just really didn't know how well it would work administratively. We didn't know the environment that students would be testing in. We knew that it would be at home, most likely, but we didn't want things like dropped internet or slow internet or parents, siblings, whomever interrupting the test taking experience to have an effect on the student's ability to show us what they knew in math. And so we gave that extended 5-hour time limit for all of the tests to try to minimize that construct irrelevant variance that might come into play by all of these external factors and the fact that everybody was working and learning from home suddenly. And so we wanted to remain as flexible as possible. In that first year, there was kind of a subset of campuses that opted to just fully use those placement tests, and likely maybe using them in combination with if a student had an ACT score or other multiple measures pieces. And I think at the time that we put those out, I will admit it, my own naivety, we were like, well, this is a one year thing that's going to happen. And I think we all know that that was not the case. So 2021, we ended up doing just exactly the same thing, online, unproctored, extended time limit. But we also started to look at some of the data that we had coming in as well. In 2021, we saw a large increase in the number of students who took exams, I think in part because many of us in our campuses were concerned about students maybe coming in without those SAT and ACT scores as well. As we looked at the data, we found that it kind of varied by disciplines. So for math, we did find that there was a shift in score distributions and a shift that we were seeing higher scores than what we typically have expected. We saw that a little bit with world language, not much, and we didn't really see any differences in score distributions for the English exam. The other piece that we looked at was the benefit of being online is that you can get a lot of process data. So things like, how are people navigating throughout the exam? And timing data. How long are they taking to complete the exam as a whole? And how long are they taking on each individual item? So we looked at that timing data and felt that since things were running well administratively, the majority of students were completing the exams within what would be the standard time limit, and keeping in mind that that extended 5-hour also helped for students who would have been approved for an extended time accommodation. We felt that we could return to standard time, and we were anticipating going into our advisory board meeting last December, proposing that we remain online and unproctored, that we return to standard time. At one point, we were proposing a lockdown browser, and that as the center, we would start to look at more process data, such as calculator use in the math exam, and begin to build in data forensics, which is very commonly used in like licensure and certification programs, to basically try to get a sense at whether or not, like a credibility type score. Are we seeing data that might be anomalous on the exams from what we would expect? And we were prepared to go in and make this proposal again during that December 2021 advisory board meeting. And at the request of the Math Placement Test Committee, we wrote up what our proposal was and sent it out to all of our committee members. And we started to hear back from committee members, and in particular from math departments, that there were some concerns with that model. And most notably, things like having a lockdown browser doesn't really help if somebody has a cell phone with them, right? And that the building of the data forensics, it sounds really great, but it's going to take time to do that. And so what are we supposed to do in the meantime? And so in an attempt to be responsive to what we were hearing, we pivoted at the last moment and went into the advisory board meeting suggesting that we return to a regional placement testing model for the 2022 testing cycle. And anticipating that it would be a somewhat scaled down model, but that we would also be offering, again, the computer-based proctored testing that we were offering prior to 2020. There was sufficient interest, or that there's a lot of stakeholders involved in this, and so instead of meeting just with the advisory board, we met with the full provost council, and some concerns came up for the spring 2022 testing cycle, and most notably, I believe that advisory board meeting fell the same week that Omicron hit the United States. So there were concerns with bringing students in, or potential students into campus again for in-person placement testing when we weren't really sure what was going to come next in the pandemic. There was also concerns as to whether or not we'd be able to pull together a regional placement testing on what was slightly shorter notice, but primarily concerned about whether we would be able to offer enough capacity in the Milwaukee area. Because historically, Milwaukee has provided the most capacity for regional placement testing, and they no longer have a testing office. And at that point, we knew that was the case. We had some ideas on how we might be able to offer some capacity in Milwaukee, but nothing fully solidified. So there were concerns that perhaps we wouldn't be able to reach enough students with what we were going to build. And there was a lot of conversations about whether or not it makes sense to return to a paper-based testing program as well. So the provosts decided that for the 2022 testing cycle, so the testing cycle that we are currently in, or what your incoming freshmen took this year, that we should remain online and unproctored, but that we should also continue talking with all of our stakeholders in placement testing. So this last year, we stayed online and unproctored, but we did return to standard time. So 90-minute exam for math. Again, students who were requesting an accommodation due to a disability did so through the same process that they did prior to 2020, and we were able to offer extended time accommodations when they were approved. So, and what we saw, we're just very initial into looking at that data, but since returning to extended time, we have seen the score distributions start to shift back down some. One possible explanation is the return to the standard time. Another potential explanation is, I think that there's a potential that we could start, this would be when we would start to see maybe potential pandemic effects as well. So that's the history of where we've been since up through this most recent round of placement testing. Again, at the recommendation of the provosts and our advisory board, we have spent much of this last year talking to various stakeholders. So stakeholders obviously include our placement test item development committees that we talk with about all things placement testing and policy and future directions of the exam. But there's a lot of other stakeholders as well. So folks in advising, folks in admissions, in freshman orientation or transfer orientation programs. And we brought together a separate group that included folks from testing from all of those areas. I believe that 11 campuses were represented in that group. it did not include content folks, with the exception of Jason as chair of the math placement test committee, as well as a representative from World Languages at UW Milwaukee, since we knew that we would need to figure out a solution for Milwaukee if we were to think about returning to in-person proctored testing. And in all of our conversations across all of these stakeholders, in addition, right, all of our site coordinators actually had their meeting yesterday, and we told them what we were proposing at that meeting as well. And, you know, I think that one of the clear things is that opinions on how what we should do moving forward vary. And it's depends, it varies across institutions, it varies within institutions sometimes as well. So, you know, we've pretty consistently heard from the math folks that we really think that the math test needs to be proctored. Okay. But we've also heard, like, oh, you know, if there is a potential to do other item types or things like that, if it was online and still proctored. From languages, we've heard, again, it's not completely consistent, but largely it's okay to remain online. That opens up a lot of different item types that we could think about doing, things like listening comprehension, other aspects that we could build in. And then we've heard from other stakeholders that, you know, administratively, online unproctored placement testing went really well, that we felt like it was pretty accessible for students. They didn't have to drive to a campus or to a testing location. They could take the test when it was convenient to them. We got scores when we needed them. And so as we tried to compile all of these different pieces of information and different thoughts on placement testing, we came up with a model that we hope is as flexible as we think we can be, but also addresses a lot of the different concerns and considerations that we heard. So what we are planning to propose starting spring 2023, so March 2023, is the following hybrid model. So languages, English, French, German, and Spanish will remain online and unproctored using the same delivery mechanism that we've been using for the last few years. For math, it's kind of a two-part situation. First, the institution will decide if their incoming students need to take a proctored math exam or if it's okay to take an unproctored math exam. If the institution says it's okay, we will take they can take an unproctored math exam, then they get an online unproctored test in the same delivery platform as the languages. So basically the same thing that we've had for the last few years. If the institution says that students need to take a proctored exam, then the student has a choice. The student decides either to come to an in-person paper-based regional placement testing date, or to do live online proctoring where the test is delivered online, but they are monitored in real time by a person. So not AI, not artificial intelligence proctoring, but live online proctored via webcam. And that would come at an additional cost to the student. The benefits of only doing regional placement testing with a math exam is that we can offer multiple sessions in one day, right? Previously, they were coming in and taking a 90-minute math test, a 90-minute English test, and likely a 60-minute world language test. That's a long day with breaks in between. But if we're doing only math, we can offer a morning session and an afternoon session, maybe even 3 sessions within any given day, which allows us to offer a more scaled down paper-based regional placement testing model. And we have been working with folks at UWM and in the Milwaukee area to figure out how to offer placement testing in Milwaukee. Laurel, I see your hand. Why don't you ask your question now?
Okay, so what I would like to know is if we've been working on doing alternate placements by high school transcript, where somebody has to go in and look at the math classes and the grades in those math classes and that high school transcript.
Mhm.
And I know that our administration is going to try very hard to make us accept online unproctored placement tests. They are going to be like, okay, nope, you know, we have to have this, you know, we will lose students if we don't.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so I know that I'm going to be under a lot of pressure, but I also know that students coming in with those scores, some of them are placed right, and some of them are just so over their head. And so I would like to have I would like to have a situation where a student can either take a proctored placement test, and that's cool, that covers all their bases, or they can take an unproctored placement test, but it has to be backed up by high school grades or it doesn't count. All right, so it needs to be multiple measures if it comes in as an unproctored test. Is there a way to, when you push out that information to the universities, to say, this test was an unproctored test and this test was a proctored test? That's
Yep.
what I want.
That is a great question. And thankfully, we had our site coordinators meeting yesterday because our programmer was on that call. So currently, when we push out scores, right, we push them out to a box account on each of your campuses, and there is somebody there who grabs those scores and uploads them. And how we intend to handle that is that right, anybody who has an unproctored, they will be coming in one data file, and anybody else with proctored, they would come in a separate data file. So they'll already be physically separated out in those data files, but also the naming convention of the forms will be different for proctored and unproctored. So proctored math and unproctored math will be different forms, so they won't be receiving the same form. And we can handle it that way. We do have a centralized database that the question came up whether we be able to indicate or add that into the database. That is something that Julie is going to be looking into. But currently, when we push scores to your box account, we should be able to say these are the folks that did proctored and these come from unproctored.
Thanks. That seems helpful.
Okay. Is it Tatiana? Is that correct?
Yes, I have a question. So do you have any data set that shows students who took those online unproctored exam over COVID, during the COVID, like over the time that was offered? Do you have any data that shows the percentage of students who were I would say like correctly placed based on their success in the corresponding math class.
Mhm,
And the percentage of students who were placed incorrectly based on their scores and basically failed or dropped or withdraw from the class, so they were not successful in the class. Is there any such data?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. And that's a good segue into the rest of what we're planning as well. So a couple things there, and those of you who have worked with me for years, I don't think you're going to be surprised at what's coming. Final grade in class isn't always the best indicator if someone was placed appropriately. It's often all we have, but think of all of the things that can happen in that 15-week semester that would potentially be reflected in a grade, but doesn't necessarily mean that somebody was placed incorrectly at the beginning of the class. And then the other piece is that, like, I have access to that data here on the Madison campus, but would need to work individually with your individual campuses and their IR office to get that data to do it on your individual campuses. Now, the extra piece of that, or what we're also planning moving forward, is a few things. The first is to study characteristics of items that are more susceptible to things like Chegg and photomath, so that we can better inform our item writing practices. So, are there types of items or ways in which we could write items that make them, I'm coining this phrase, make them less Cheggable, right? So that it just isn't as susceptible to those tools that are out there. Obviously, keeping in mind that those tools are going to evolve maybe at a faster rate than we're going to see it, but it can help inform our item writing. We're also still planning on building all of that data forensics, or looking into process data to see if and how it might be informative moving forward. But now, to get back, the third piece to kind of circle back to that question is offering math in this hybrid, and potentially having data in an unproctored environment and a proctored environment gives us a really unique opportunity to actually study the differences outside of what happened the last few years within the pandemic too. And so from a data perspective, it could be very rich, and then could be used in conjunction with some of the data that you are talking about that we could get from campuses on, are there differences in how, not only how these students place, but are there differences in their outcomes as well? Does that answer your question?
Yes. So basically, like, if our campus wants to have some data to make a decision, so we can just contact you and work individually for our campus. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm. Mhm. So,
Sonia,
yes,
Sonia,
hi, Alex.
you mentioned making things less checkable. So that would require piloting and this and that. That sounds like 2-3 years.
Yeah, so we're going to start by having our graduate students sweep our item bank and plug them into Chegg, into Photomath, see, like, are we getting correct answers? Is Chegg maybe putting out an incorrect answer? And what are the characteristics of the item? So an initial run, like, we've found that with Chegg anyway, or Mathway, that if there's an image, it's harder, but that might not actually work with Photomath. I haven't tried Photomath yet, but so we're going to start with what our existing items are, see if we can learn about the characteristics of those items. But then, yes, then we'd have to try to write items if we can identify, here's characteristics that are less susceptible, write items and pilot them as well. Carrie?
Yeah, I'm actually curious about the cost piece, the cost to student part. If they decide they are going to go the live online proctoring route. Do you have a sense of how that compares to what it used to cost when they chose the
Yeah.
online exam?
Yeah. So I can't give you, I'm hesitant to give you what the exact number is because we haven't gotten the exact number. We have gotten a ballpark, but that was before this group was acquired by Measure Learning now too. And so it would be a different proctoring service now providing that live online proctoring. But I can tell you, I'm pretty sure previously when it was go to a test site, if you're just taking one test, it was $80. So we expect it to be less than that. And actually quite a bit less than that.
I'm sorry, if you can just repeat that. It was $80 before, and we
Yes.
expect it to be less now.
Yes.
Okay,
Because
thank you.
before was in person, going to the test site, you're using their computer equipment. The live online proctoring, just with what we know with industry, we would expect that it would be less than that. But that is also one thing that came up yesterday in the site coordinators meeting. And it's a couple of things that we really need to get an answer from is that question, and whether or not the live online proctoring is compatible with Chromebooks, because we know that most of our students are likely being, if they're using equipment that they've gotten from their high school, it's likely a Chromebook. And it hasn't been an issue the last few years because we weren't using a lockdown browser with the unproctored assessment, but moving towards a proctored, we need to make sure that that we're not going to run into problems there. Alex?
How much residual testing, I think that's what it's called, happened before COVID and now, and what are your thoughts about that? I guess the thing we're going to run into there, though, is many of our summer orientation people are going to want to have the thing online. I mean, the orientation online now that they've fallen into that habit, but maybe not. So
Yeah.
I don't know if residual testing is so realistic, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with our testing program, maybe as Alex, residual testing is what we historically have called anything that happens outside of those regional dates. So anything that happens outside of those preset dates or the testing window for CBT where we're offering those preset dates. So things like doing retests on your campus would be considered residual testing. Any situation where you're only testing your own students, that's considered residual testing. So for things like special summer programs, other reasons that you might be only offering placement testing for your own students and not opening it up to all students within system, that's what we would call residual testing. And I'm going to say, Alex, I don't have great numbers on how much residual testing was happening beforehand. My sense is that it largely was just for retesting and for those special summer programs, with the exception of Milwaukee did a lot of test dates just for their own students because they also were providing an in-house placement test in a different subject as well, but they also did regional dates. Under this model, I think that we still would think that you could be doing residual testing on your campus, so retests. We kind of have, over the last few years, really have been recommending that if a student is asking for a retest in pretty much any instance, giving a paper in-person retest makes good sense. You know, if a student is saying, hey, I had internet connectivity issues, this score doesn't reflect what I can do, I need a retest. Well, the only way you remove those internet connectivity issues is to remove the internet and offer a paper-based retest. I think that there's still discussion on allowing large-scale residual paper-based testing. I think that at least at the start, it's something that we certainly could do, especially if we're already doing a paper-based regional program. Where we start to maybe question whether that should be the case is if we start to move away and build new item types, or if you think for the language exam, start to build in, say, a listening comprehension section. Suddenly now a paper test and an online test, the content is very different, and then that becomes problematic. So I think that under this current model, given that campuses will have paper forms, that this residual paper-based testing could still be likely for at least for the foreseeable future. But we'll have internal conversations here, and I can circle back on that as well. Geeta?
Yeah, so will there be enough testing centers? I know Milwaukee does not have one, but other places still will have exams?
Yeah, so that is part of the conversation that we had yesterday with the site coordinators, and my colleague Tim O'Connor, who coordinates that regional placement testing program, is working with individual campuses to figure out dates and capacity. One of the things that we don't know yet, however, though, is how many campuses will be advising students to do a proctored math test, because that will impact the capacity that we need. And so this proposal currently has not been approved. It will be going to our advisory board. That meeting is in the beginning of December historically, and I think we're planning still to the beginning of December. It's likely is going to be your provost who ultimately will decide if to use the placement tests, how to use them, and in what capacity for math. So if your department has strong feelings, it would be good to let them know. We have a solution figured out for Milwaukee. UWM has been really great in working with us at finding space. And we have also reached out with some of our colleagues in Waukesha at the Waukesha County Technical College to help provide proctoring services. So we think that will be pretty good covering Milwaukee, but we'll need to, we might need to adjust accordingly once we learn what campuses' plans are. We also still are planning on having dates in the Minneapolis area as we have in the past. Tatiana and then Kevin.
I think Kevin was first.
Oh, okay, I thought yours went up with Geeta. So, okay, Kevin.
No, go ahead, Tatiana. I actually have a couple. So
No, that was I first raised hand, then drop it, and because it's kind of like I came with another question. Let me just turn on camera. I have a question. For example, if some universities within University of Wisconsin system will require a proctor test, and some universities will require non-proctor test, and for example, a student wants to apply for several universities, will student be allowed to take the same student register for both proctored and non-proctored exam at the same time, and then ask you to send proctored exams to campuses ABC and non-proctored exams to campuses 1, 2, 3. So basically.
So our recommendation in that situation, if a student is applying to multiple campuses, or even if they think that they might apply to multiple campuses, our recommendation to them will be that you should take a proctored exam. Because, and anybody here can correct me if I am wrong, but the thought is that even if your institution says take an unproctored math test, that you'll probably be okay accepting scores from a proctored exam, but the reverse might not be true, right? So the recommendation would be take the proctored version of the test.
But if students doesn't feel like very strong, confident in their knowledge, and they try to kind of like get the maximum possible score, probably non-proctored exam, I mean, assuming that students will not cheat and everything, but like reduced anxiety and more comfortable environment and everything. So probably non-proctored exam naturally can give can give better chances to get better score. So students might be interested in like taking non-proctored exam as much as possible. So technically, is it possible for the students to take both types of exam at the same time and just ask to send the scores to specific institution based on the requirements?
That's an interesting question. And I think that that's a question that I would have to check in with our partners at Measure Learning, because the proctored version, now this removes paper-based, but if you're thinking about the live online proctored version versus the unproctored version, they're delivered in two different platforms. So the proctored version is delivered in what their platform was for secure testing for forever. The unproctored version of the test is actually being delivered in what is typically how they deliver practice exams for licensure and certification tests. They just built it out to function to serve our needs too. So it might end up being, they couldn't take them at the same time, but say they take an unproctored and then they realize, oh, but this institution requires a proctored version, that they would need to work with our office. We'd resend their eligibility and they take the proctored version of the test, very similar to how we've been approving retests over the last 3 years as well.
And oh, thank you. And I have like a very quick question for everyone, like kind of like for general. For example, if students applying for the university who doesn't require proctored exam and submit scores with non-proctored exam, and then like after the first semester, students want to transfer to another institution that does require proctored exam, and during that one single semester that students attend university that does not require proctored exam, student doesn't take any mathematics classes, for example, like take general education classes or whatever. So is it okay? How are we going to, like, we are all together as like math departments of the University of Wisconsin system, how we are going to handle that if students apply for the university with non-proctored exam and then quickly transfer to the university with proctored exam and those scores? So this question, like, thank you.
So yeah, that might be a question for the larger group. I can tell you one way to handle it would be to have the student retest, which might be a good idea anyway, because now some time has lapsed and they either have or likely have not taken a math class.
Thank you.
I was just gonna jump in and say that often the school that they go to, that they transfer to, doesn't even get those scores, right? So they had their scores, they were sent to the institution they started at. When they transferred schools, those scores didn't come over, so they have to retake it anyway.
Okay, thank you. It's good to know.
Kevin?
Yeah, so actually, my first question maybe comes off that question. So how will an institution actually know whether a placement test was proctored or unproctored? All we've ever got so far has been the three subscale scores. We don't get any indication of how they took it or where they took it. Or,
Right, so that's part of when we push scores to anything that's coming in that's unproctored will be in one data file, and anything that's coming in the other, I don't remember what I said first, unproctored will be in one data file and proctored will be in a separate data file.
Okay, so if Milwaukee, as we will, would only possibly accept proctored tests, we will only see tests. We will only see proctored test results.
Well, if somebody says Milwaukee and they, for whatever reason, they take an unproctored test, you'll still get that result, but it'll be in a separate data file under unproctored because they'll be getting a different form.
Okay,
of
okay,
the
so
test.
they'll be labeled somehow when they come to us.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
be able to see it. Okay, okay, that's that one. My other questions were around payment, not so much the student payment for the proctor test, but the institutional fee for the test itself.
Mhm.
So we got one communication that if a student takes a test and indicates an intention to attend a certain campus, that campus will be charged for the test.
Mhm.
Is that correct? And just how exactly is that going to be implemented? Because we frankly at Milwaukee, we can see lots of people saying they're going to come here and then never showing up.
Yeah, yeah. So historically, that has not been what the billing model is. So historically, campuses were charged proportional to the size of their incoming freshman class. And as part of that advisory board discussion last year, there's also was voted to switch to a usage model. So campuses will be charged based on the number of units or the number of tests that they used over the last year. There's always kind of a lag in by a year with where the budget is and where we assess the numbers. And so that is actually something that system and our advisory board has tasked us with doing, with coming up with what the numbers have been within a given time range. That's actually on my to-do list for later this week to run all of those numbers. And then that will be looked at the advisory board meeting as well.
So I wasn't. So are you saying then that because of the lag, we'd actually get charged according to the students who arrived, or
Well, we
seems to
would,
be-
yeah,
that seems to be
so
going
like
back to the old model? But
you get billed. You're not getting charged for the students that arrived. So like say somebody says, I'm coming to UW Milwaukee, and then they don't, maybe they don't go anywhere, right? That still is included in the usage model, right? So instead of just being charged by the number of your incoming freshmen, you're now charged based on the number of tests that were used.
right. And then I think my final question, I think, was for the last few years, we've actually opted out of the system test entirely, and we've
Mhm.
been using Alex, and we seem to be pretty happy with the results there. Assuming we can continue to do that, are we still charged for students who say they're coming to UW Milwaukee?
Well, I mean, world languages are still using UW.
Yes, but math isn't. Math
Right.
and English are not.
Right, so I can tell you that I've looked at the data, there's very few people who have like put in anything other than world language
Mhm.
for Milwaukee. But I think some of this will be up for discussion at our meeting, but currently, yes, you'd be charged for whatever unit for students who indicated Milwaukee.
Okay, thank you.
Craig?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I don't have very much confidence in the live virtual proctoring based on personal experiences. And as long as you're keeping separate data on different types of exams, I would suggest that you separate the virtual proctoring and the live proctoring.
That's
If
a
there's a difference
good
there.
question. Yeah, that's a good point. I can talk with our programmer, and even, I mean, even just from a research perspective, that would be good. Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
No, that's great. Tatiana?
Yes, I have now a question. So you mentioned that if, for example, a university requires the proctor test, but students take non-proctor test and indicate that university that he's planning to apply. So basically, those data will go to the university, and there will be two separate packages, like proctored and unproctored, even if the university does not accept unproctored test. Correct? This is
Yeah,
what
I think
happened.
I'll have to confirm with our programmer, but my sense is that we will send you whatever data that we have, which is how we've always done that.
Yeah, now my question is, you mentioned that universities will be charged based on the taken test. Should
Mhm.
university be charged for the non-proctor test if university clearly indicated that they do not accept those tests? This is my question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that they probably will under that model, but the other thing is that we will, once we have data now under this model, we'll be able to see like how frequently that occurs too. So, and whether or not that is something that needs to be factored into the billing model.
Yeah, because I mean, students can try whatever is available, but on the other hand, if we have pile of scores tests that are not acceptable, and campus will be charged for that.
Yep, that's fair. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. So,
Okay, our time is, I think, almost up. It's 3:27. Are there any final questions or?
and I will also just say, like, I understand this, it's a lot to think about, a lot to process. We're still thinking about it. So if questions come up, or maybe you go back and you talk to your department and other questions come up, please feel free to email me and I'll do my best to answer them. We will, like I said, this has not been approved yet. It will be going to our advisory board during the advisory board meeting, but and we can keep our item development committees updated, and I can certainly reach out to Carrie or Kevin and Alex and keep this group updated as well. Carrie?
I just have one last sort of comment, and that is if we can find some kind of way to continue the communication among institutions as we're making, these decisions. It seems to me that the more consistency we have, the less confusion there's going to be, and maybe we'll have less of the wrong kind of exam results coming to a certain institution if we all sort of make a similar decision. So I guess I wondered if Kevin and Alex wanted to propose another meeting or a forum in which folks can just provide updates as you're working with your department and then your administration. Just a thought.
Yes, well, I think we could, if whether or not it's another meeting, we could certainly get the email conversation going or some kind of forum. Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Well, I think have come to the end of our time. So unless anyone has anything vital to add, I'll thank Sonia very much for all the information. As always, a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for attending. And I will just prompt you one last time. I think almost everyone has done this, but if you're a late attendee, perhaps if your department has voted or endorsed or supported or not endorsed the math readiness statement, could you please just put the result of that into the chat? Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.